Hello, I'm Jeff Johnston, host of the Living Undeterred podcast. And once again, I have an astounding guest lined up for today's show. I met Jeff on LinkedIn, just like I've met, it seems like almost most of my people in my circle the last few years have been on social media, which has been a good thing, I guess, for social media. Jeffrey Quamme is in Connecticut, and July 2nd, we will be rolling the 34-foot fully wrapped Living Undeterred US tour, a mental health initiative RV into his town. And Jeff has jumped on board. He's a passionate advocate, and he does have a record. Jeff, you didn't know this, but you do have a record for my podcast already. You have the most initials behind anybody I've ever had on the show. So I'm not
It's
gonna
window dressing.
I'm not gonna try. I have like one initial. I don't even use it because it's my investment
Yeah.
background. But why don't you just give us a little intro about who you are, what your expertise is, and based on what I can see in your profile, I am so excited to talk to you today.
Okay, sure. My name is Jeff Quamme. I live in Hartford, Connecticut, and I am the executive director of a credentialing body, the Connecticut Certification Board. And what we do is competency-based credentialing for mental health and SUD professionals, really with the focus of ensuring that people have competence and practice ethically to protect the person served as well as their family and community. I have been in the field since 1988. It's in different roles. So it's quite a long time. I'm also I speak around the country on many issues, medication assisted treatment for opioid use disorder. I do a lot of ethics work, and I've been lucky. I get to go around the country and talk about the credibility issues in the substance use disorder field that we really need to address
Hmm.
so that we can be more effective and uh, help more people. I am somebody who lives with post-traumatic stress disorder and major depressive disorder, and for as long as I can remember. So this is really a personal and professional work to me, uh, being a part of the Living Undeterred tour. And I'm really excited. On July 2nd, we'll be with our partners at the University of Bridgeport in our largest city. So I'm excited for that to happen.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you participate. This whole thing started off, back last in May of 2021, and just kind of as an idea. I have attention deficit, so and I have a hard time staying still, and so I just felt like I wasn't doing enough, Jeff. And so went out like the next day and bought an RV and thought I told everyone I'm going to go drive around the United States with my two boys and we're going to raise $1 million. And they're like, "When are you going to do this?" And I said, "In 60 days." So that was last May. And then they said, "Jeff, if you do this, you're the biggest idiot I know, because if you do this correctly, because there's no way you can do this in 60 days, but if you do this correctly, you can change lives." So I shelved the idea. We pushed it back, and we actually shove off. By the time this plays, we'll already be on the road. But yeah, we're so excited. I mean, I just think Johann Hari is a great individual. I like to quote a lot. I read his book, Chasing the Scream, The War on Drugs, the colossal failure in the war on drugs. And he says, and I was going to ask you this question, the opposite of addiction is connectivity, is connection.
Hmm.
And I didn't know, maybe we could start there. We talk about addiction a lot. I guess, first of all, don't we all have addictions? I mean, aren't we all addicts in some way, shape, or form? And aren't there good addictions as well? But then what do you think the opposite of addiction is then?
I certainly think that the opposite agree that the opposite of addiction is connection, because it is a disease of isolation, a disease of loneliness, and for many, just stopping using whatever the substance may be does not form that connectivity, does not form those relationships. So it's a learning process for individuals. And to me, the word addiction carries certain
Mm-hmm.
connotations in my head, and they're not especially positive. So I certainly think that we all have behavioral patterns that we follow, or routines and things that we may be whether we're on long-term medications,
Mm-hmm.
a physical and tissue dependence on. But I'm a little different. I don't see a lot of positive in the word addiction, but I understand what you're saying, and I don't disagree that we kind of all get into behavioral routines, and some are positive and some are negative.
Yeah, I think, I had a reporter the other day and asked me what question are you trying to solve? What problem are you trying to solve with your tour? And I struggled with this forever because I didn't really know how to answer that. Then I figured out the easiest way to answer a question is don't answer it. And so I came up with this answer. If what we were doing was working, we wouldn't be doing the tour. That was my answer. And I think that's when I saw your status quo thing, it caught my attention because a lot of people on social media kind of play this echo chamber effect where they like to just not upset the apple cart. They kind of just copy and share and pat each other's back. But you seem to be kind of someone out there that's not looking for a fight, but you got a little Irish in you, you know, maybe you're looking for a little bit of a scuffle. Um, but it's like, I admire that. It's like, if what we were doing was working, Jeff, you and I'd be selling cars or something. We'd be doing something different. And so
Right.
the problem is most of the statistics in almost every aspect across the board, unless you just find a very unique, odd statistic where something dropped or got better. Most across the board are all worse than they were, at least a decade ago. So we have a big task ahead of us. And I think your position is very unique. I've never had a guest on that does what you do because you're actually kind of certifying the people that are actually talking to the people, right? And so how
Yeah.
important is that? I mean, that's huge. That's making sure that the people that are, in the trenches talking to the patients, I guess, for lack of a better word, the
Hmm.
individuals, making sure they're credentialed, they're certified, they're up on all their continuing educations and everything. So maybe talk a little bit about what got you into that and how important that is that we have really good people out there helping us.
I think that there were no grand purposes for getting in this when I was younger. It was a job that was available. I was a psychology major as an undergrad,
Mm,
so it just working with juveniles, and so it just kind of took on its own life. I had a significant family history of mental illness and substance use disorders, so I was surrounded by that. So maybe that was driving, then I didn't know it unconsciously. Um, but what I've seen over the years is things that I was trained to do as a social work student in the 90s and how to interact with individuals has rolls over and changes. We learn new information,
mm-hmm,
and hopefully we adapt to that information and we change what we do to be more effective. And that's kind of general overall in the treatment world. And I noticed that in the substance use disorder treatment world, there's still a lot of focus on what we used to do.
sure.
And we talk about meeting clients where they're at, but often we want them to meet us where we're at,
Mm-hmm,
whether it's the policies and procedures of our facility, or follow whatever our recovery recommendations are, instead of truly getting with someone saying, hey, where do you want to be and let me help you get there.
mm-hmm,
And we're starting to get there, but we're not close enough yet. And so I just want to ask the questions to kind of make people think.
mm-hmm,
And we do have requirements for continuing education, and we have very strict ethical code and procedure to investigate ethical complaints. And it really is about the person served. It's not about what my needs are as a professional. It's um, helping people out of suffering in a way that they deem is best. And I think that that's important. We all have different ways of coping and living our
right.
lives. And I think we have to respect that.
I've been thrust into this just 5 years ago. I'm 56, and at age 50, I'm a financial wealth manager, doing well, married, 3 kids. Everything's good. And then boom, my son dies, and then a couple years later, my wife dies, and then I was an alcoholic. I realized since probably ninth grade, so I quit in
Hmm.
17, and I got into this. Not, I don't know, industry is a terrible word, I guess, but I got into this side of the fence where I started talking to people, about disease, about choice, about, you know, medically assisted treatment, which we can talk about that, about harm reduction, which I never even heard of harm reduction like 3 years ago.
Hmm.
So I've come into this very green, like learning, um, and very open minded, a little naive, a lot naive, but I'm learning a lot. I'm getting a very well diversified pool of people through my podcast and being a guest on podcasts and now the tour. We're going to hear so many different ways to deal with this. And I guess the frustration I run into, Jeff, is a lot of times I meet people that are just so convinced one way or two ways to fix this addiction substance abuse issue, and they're dead set that their way is the right way. And then I talk to somebody else, and they're saying, nope, it's a choice. It's not a disease. There's lots of people out there doing very well, running their businesses that way. And I'm like, man, I'm just so interested in trying to help people and save lives. I don't really care too much about what people believe. I just care what works. And so I guess where are the new frontiers in mental health? I mean, you hear so much about psychedelics and brain research technology and all these things. I mean, where are the new ideas? What's fresh out there that we're not seeing right now?
I'm not sure that we're not seeing, but as you mentioned, the idea of psychedelics for treatment, a lot of people are against that without really knowing why they're
Right.
against it. I'm on the fence because I don't know
Right.
enough, but I do see that it's working, so I certainly can't rule it out. It's up to me to learn
Hmm.
more. I think that although we've got 70 years of research on how effective medication-assisted treatment is using methadone or buprenorphine, we still have people who say that it's trading one drug for another and kind of cheapen that.
Yeah.
Um, with the same harm reduction has been around forever. In 1986, Connecticut told us we had to wear seat belts,
Hmm.
and people screamed, and that was ultimately harm reduction, which we saw
Yeah. Certainly.
has been saving
Right.
lives. Um, and I think more things are going to come on the horizon. How we do our jobs, and it's going to continually be altered and changed. Even some of the great things that this field is doing, in terms of looking at how people change in stages of change, that they're even being altered because more information is coming in. And for me. And we're not a couple of young guys. I'm
Right.
55. You're 56. Um, and I'm at the point now where I really just want to ask the questions that people don't want to answer, because I think that's where the truths lie for this field. And we all have different truths, but we also have to accept that the folks that we serve have different truths as well. And to me, accepting that it's certainly not a cure, because it's so multi-pronged.
Hmm.
We've got to look at prevention, how important that is. I have a colleague, Dr. Aaron Weiner, who has made the point in Time Magazine saying the only way out of this opioid and overdose crisis long term is to focus on prevention and get people to
Yeah.
stop them from using as
Right.
they move forward. And I can't uh, can do nothing but agree with
Right.
that. But I think that we have to respect what everybody's role is, let people do their jobs, and make sure that people are trained to do their
Do
jobs.
you know Patrick Moore?
The name is ringing a bell. I think I know him from
Yep,
LinkedIn.
yep. Patrick Moore is kind of reminds me of you. He'll jump in the conversations, and kind of just you know poke the bear a little bit, make some comments and things. And Patrick's has he's older than you and I, but he's got research from Kennesaw State University back in the 80s and 90s where he studied I think 5,000 students, and his book is called Prehab, and it's identifying the 4 or 5 stages of the prehabilitation. So you're exactly right. He's pretty convinced. I mean, Patrick's one of these guys you talk to that you have to go back. I read his book 3 times just so I could try to, make sure I Googled enough words so I could understand what he was saying. He's a very intelligent guy. But he's pretty convinced what you just said, that we need to go back and we need to identify the risk patterns, the autonomy and dependency in people in the pre-habituation stage. And I have no clinical background, but I can certainly see my interest when I got thrust into this. The inclination was for me to go after the supply side, Jeffrey, to go after the drugs, the cartels, go after
Hmm.
the big pharma, like Dope Sick did, and all that. And then I thought, I had a minor in psychology, not a major, but a minor in psychology in college, and I'm like, maybe we need to focus on the demand side more. The why behind the reasons people are taking these things in the first place. I've never done drugs. I know my reasons why. I would have done all of them.
Hmm.
I have attention deficit. If I saw a bag of Coke, I would snort the whole bag and be dead. So I knew I didn't have. That's why I don't eat potato chips and all that stuff, because I know I don't have an off button. And
Yeah.
and so I knew that like when I was 15, but I was an alcoholic. for some reason I didn't apply that same, and I was a compulsive gambler for almost 20 years. I had a very tough gambling problem. Um,
Mhm.
but I couldn't shut that off, but I could not do drugs. So I guess how can somebody not have the ability to shut off one addiction, but then on a couple other, they just can't stop? I mean, or they know that they can't do it. You know what? How does the mind work that way?
You'd have to ask somebody a lot smarter than me that, but again, we all metabolize things different. We all see things different. But what we've done in the substance use disorder field over the years is assuming that anyone who is using drugs of any kind is an addict. Anybody who drinks is an alcoholic. Instead of realizing and looking and saying, I have a colleague, Carl Hart,
Oh
who wrote a
yeah,
book called
yep. I've read it. I
who
saw him
wrote
on
a
about
yeah,
4 or 5 podcasts. Yep,
drug
yep.
use for adults, and he's a brilliant man. I've got to speak with him a few times, had dinner with him, and he makes it clear that we've got to start being honest about what's going on around us. We used to tell kids, and our role in prevention was to say, if you use drugs, you're going to go to jail or you're going to die. And these kids are seeing people around them every day drinking and using drugs who have not gone to
Yeah,
jail, that are alive and living
right.
well. So we've got to start talking about the realities of what's happened. I don't necessarily co sign all of Carl's
Me too.
beliefs,
Yep.
but I respect the fact that the guy is brilliant and he lives his life. Uh, the way he chooses to, and he's just making a point. He's not saying everybody should go
Right.
out and use drugs. He's talking about what his experience, and talks a lot about harm reduction. So I think that we need to stop judging others' behavior based on what our perceptions of them are,
So
and listen to what people say.
is alcohol a drug?
Absolutely.
This is where just I think the hypocrisy, and this is so old, it's not new, but it's like, you look at parents and they're saying, don't do drugs, don't do drugs, don't do drugs, and then mom and dad have a medicine cabinet full of all these different types of anxiety pills or whatever they're taking. Matter of fact, Adderall now I think is prescribed more to adults than it is to kids. But and you watch like Super Bowl and you watch, all the TV shows, and there's just alcohol, alcohol, alcohol. And it's like, you're right. Kids hear all this, don't. Mom and dad say don't drink, and then they're drinking wine every night. And I just think if we really want to draw the line in the sand and be the best we can for our kids, then we need to show them, not tell them. And that means you need to stop drinking. If you don't want your kids to drink, you shouldn't drink. And again, I'm a hypocrite. When my son was going through all his addictions, my wife and I sat around and we got drunk. And I didn't realize that I could have probably been a better dad at that point. And I waited till it was too late even to quit to help my wife, because she was already 80% in decline. And when I quit, it was
Hmm.
just too late. But the life lesson in that is that all parents need to make those decisions, those conscious decisions that, we want to blame society, we want to blame social media, we want to blame all these, the government or whatever. And then we're at home drinking, getting drunk, every night. And our
Hmm.
kids see that,
Yeah, and I agree. We have to look at it. It starts at home, and I can't speak to the accuracy of what I'm about to
Yeah.
say. I just know that I've heard it. Is when it's truly an American thing. One is not enough. You know, one is too much. 10 is not
Right.
enough. But when you look at countries where alcohol may be used appropriately, and I think of what I was told, Italy,
Hmm.
where they'll have alcohol with meals. There's a respect for alcohol in its place, so you don't see people developing, you know, children developing alcohol use problems as much as we see here. And I think that's, if that is
Hmm.
accurate, it starts with a family.
Hmm.
That, okay, it's a part of a meal. You have a glass of wine and you move on.
Hmm.
But we don't necessarily see that. We're thrust with commercials in our face, and we're thrust with pharmaceutical commercials in our face. And make no mistake, that's their job to sell those
Right.
products.
Right.
Um, but we want to have, the idea of better life through chemistry is in our
Boy, isn't
face
that so true? Isn't
24/7.
that so true?
And but we do have to not just look at the supply side. um, and I think that we can attack the supply side in a way that doesn't mimic the war on
Oh
drugs.
yeah.
Um, but we have to look at the supply side. And several years ago, the Office of National Drug Control Policy, the Drug Czar's office, my friend David Mineta was the deputy director for demand reduction,
Hmm.
and you looked at was where trauma plays a role or where family systems play a role, and you look at all the underlining things and realize that there's not one. There's so many things that can lead someone down that path,
Yeah.
that we really have to look at the individual and their
And that's
situation.
where you talk to people that probably aren't too up on this, that they basically get their information from TV and the internet. But they'll say, well, all we got to do is shut the borders down, Mexico. It's all we got to do. Then fentanyl goes away. And I'm like, well, first of all, I don't know if that statement's true. It probably would reduce, but we're only getting 10% of the drugs anyway. So 90% of it's coming in the United States that's not, confiscated. But um, I had, I think his name was Michael Brown on. He was a DEA agent. He works for a company, can't remember the name of the company, but they have a testing system where they can test drugs. It's expensive, but their company's a private company that is kind of marketing this idea. But he told me, he goes, um, boy, I forgot what I was going to say, but he was he was talking about. Oh, here's what he said. He goes, Jeff, these drug cartels, they are so far ahead of what we think. And this was like 2 months ago. He was on my show, and he's like, they already know fentanyl is being focused on, and fentanyl is made from precursor chemicals they're getting from China. So all
Hmm.
they got to do is just tweak the precursor chemicals and just make something new. Well, then lo and behold, 2 months later, I see this ISO. This is like 50 times more powerful than fentanyl now is being like caught or confiscated. And he was exactly right. It's like, you know, and this is why some of these people are spending their whole careers chasing fentanyl. And I'm like, it's admirable, it's great, but we got to learn to pivot because the drug cartels are way ahead of us. I mean, I'm not going to say fentanyl is not going to be a big problem in 5 years, but something will be
Hmm.
bigger, I think.
I was just in North Carolina presenting at a conference, and one of the things that we were talking about was we've got to lose that tunnel vision that it's all about fentanyl or it's all
Right,
about opioids,
right.
because what we've seen over the last century is will depressants and stimulants will, like, every 30 years or so, will rotate, and we've got to start looking at the causes.
Hmm.
And like you said, we got to look at the demand side and address those causes, because it may be a different substance in 5 years, but if we don't look at the underlying stuff, we're going to
It
have a
won't
problem
matter.
with that.
So, what are the causes?
Yeah.
What do you think?
You know, certainly things like trauma, abuse,
Hmm.
mental illness, people who feel isolated.
Hmm.
It's a social lubricant. I mean, there was a study that some people, it called the Chicago Social Drinking Project, where they studied longitudinally individuals who developed substance use disorders, and many of them didn't have trauma, didn't
Hmm.
have these other normal precursors. They just liked drinking until it got to be too much. So there's not just one way. It's like you said. I wish it's an unanswerable question. What isn't there that can lead to it?
Yeah, I guess where I'm really hypersensitive is we focus so much on one thing. It's like I always use the whack-a-mole example. You hit the mole and then
Hmm.
four more pop up, and you're just trying to put out fires with a big forest fire with a bunch of thimbles. And I think we just keep peeling back the layers. We always go back to the causes, the demand, and it's easy to say, well, if people just didn't do drugs, then the drug cartels will go out of business. Well, the problem is, again, if you want to work on mental health, it's not just drugs. It could be gambling, sex addiction, food addiction. I think I saw something like 82% of medical stays or costs are based on pretty much what people eat. You know, so, a
Hmm.
lot of what we have for problems health wise is our own choices we make day or our own choices we make daily and what we decide to eat. Um, so going back to say like during COVID, which is just, everything got amplified. I think
Hmm.
alcohol usage went up 65% or something during COVID.
Hmm.
So not only was COVID difficult, but now we were drunk during COVID. But geez, I just like, so how does this get better? How do we change the narrative? I mean, I have my thoughts on that, but I was going to ask you, how do we make a difference? How do we get the numbers to start going in the right direction?
I don't know. I guess I don't know
It's
the
kind of
answer to that.
hopeless in a way.
Um,
It's like I get frustrated with trying to think about
mhm.
about all the awareness, and I go on this every podcast. Awareness is almost like to me a waste of time. I mean, it really is. If you think about, and I use this almost on every show. So people watching me say, "Here goes Jeff again." But if you look at dieting, for example, I mean, everything we put in our mouth, your water bottle right there has a label.
Hmm.
Okay, yeah, we're the heaviest industrial country in the world, and we're getting bigger every year, but we're smarter. So we can be aware about drugs and alcohol till the cows come home. I don't think it's gonna make a difference. Maybe I'm a little more negative, but I just don't think it's going to make a difference. I think until people can find actionable ways to deal with whatever they're dealing with, whether it's childhood trauma or in my life, it was later trauma in my life. Until we can find ways to navigate through, it's like a game of Frogger. You just go from one log to another to
Hmm.
get out of the way. That's what life is. And I want to remain optimistic, Jeffrey, but I'm like, man, I awareness to me just is not something I really want to spend the rest of my life doing, is making people more aware about these things. I just don't think that's going to work.
Yeah, I think that that's only the first step. And there certainly is awareness on most things. I agree with you. If I wear a blue and yellow ribbon, it doesn't do
Hmm.
anything for Ukraine. Um, but it makes me feel like I'm doing something.
Sure.
Um, but I think we get back to the basics of building families and building communities and having prevention and having difficult conversations about things. And we certainly want to be able to treat those who need it, but ultimately our goal is to reduce the number of people who need treatment. And I think prevention is that way. We look at prevention, and we recognize that there's a role for the treatment professionals, but there's also a bigger picture of recovery where you have peers and recovery
Hmm.
coaches who are helping people manage the obstacles that get in their way of a healthy life while in recovery. And I think that the more we see that, we'll start to see a change. Healthy living in community. If we
Hmm.
can build community and have difficult conversations in the community and look out for one another, and we're so hyper competitive with each other. My lawn's better than
Right.
yours, or this and that, instead of being a neighbor. And the political
Yep.
climate of the last 8 years has certainly not helped either.
How soon do parents need to start having conversations with their kids? I mean, what's an appropriate age to start talking about addiction and substance abuse and drugs and alcohol? And then how do you do it metaphorically, like through a story or something to help kids?
I don't know the answer to that. I know that certainly if they're expressing an interest in
Hmm.
that, we have to have that conversation. It's like how we deal these days, or I have a 27-year-old son, and we dealt with sex the minute he expressed a question about that, and we talked about where children come
Hmm.
from, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that we can't push those things aside, and it can't be just pointing to somebody on the street like my stepfather did, a wino sleeping in the streets of Boston, just talking about what a bad person he is, because that bad person is somebody's brother,
Yeah.
somebody's son, somebody, and just really having um, a a sense of compassion for other people.
You look at the amount of like prescription stimulants from like 1990 to 2011, I think a 20-year period of time, it went from 600,000 children on stimulants to 3.5 million over 20 years. And then you look at the movie like Dope Sick, and they
Yeah.
talk about the prescription opioids actually got cut in half, but deaths went up 100%. So there isn't always a direct correlation with these things. Sometimes there's an inverse relationship where you would just think common sense, oh, doctors cut their prescriptions in half. Well, we're going to save a lot of people. Well, deaths went up 100%. So I know it's not directly, you know,
No, but
but there's something in the numbers there that I'm just perplexed on. So we prescribe more stimulants to kids, and that makes the situation worse. We cut opioid prescriptions in half, and more people die. So what the hell what the heck do we do?
in other parts of the country than where I'm at, and you would be much more familiar in the Midwest. This is in so many deaths of individuals, we're seeing methamphetamine being a
Oh
part of that
yeah,
death.
absolutely.
I don't see that as much here in the Northeast because it's not here.
Matter of fact,
Heroin has kind of been our drug for 70 years or
I'm
so.
on the board of ASAC here, the Area Substance Abuse Council.
Yeah.
Methamphetamine is the number one reason why people come into care there.
Yeah, and when you look at the numbers, you'll see methamphetamine is combined with other substances. are being involved, and I think that might be part of the riddle there. We can't just focus and have tunnel vision on opioids or on methamphetamine, because people aren't just saying, well, I'm going to just do this one substance. We're subjected to so many different things, and the availability for so many different things, that it's rarely that somebody's using only one substance, even if it's unintentional.
I run into some issues. Maybe you can help me with this because I talk so frequently about our son Seth being prescribed Adderall at 16, and that was really the beginning of his exploration and all this stuff. So immediately, what happens is my friends' kids get prescribed Adderall, and my phone rings, like at midnight. Jeff, I have to ask you. I just got back from the doctor this afternoon, and the doctor's prescribing our 13-year-old to take Adderall. What do you think? And I'm like, gosh, I don't know what to say. I'm not a doctor, so I certainly don't want to tell them not to take it. But man, I'm very hesitant in endorsing Adderall. I'll just tell you that. My dad's a doctor, so I asked him, and he said, "Well, um, for some people that those type of stimulants work great, and for others like my son, it just kind of cracked the door open to abuse.
Hmm.
And then when he did too much Adderall, something negative happened, and then when he got off it, he crashed, and it's just like it was this vicious cycle. But I don't know. Maybe he had that predisposition that it wouldn't have mattered if it was Adderall. Maybe it was something else that would open that door. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think being predisposed certainly doesn't mean you're predetermined.
Yeah. And I think even opining on that for me would be disrespectful to you and your
Yeah.
son.
Yep.
And but there's always the opportunity that somebody can question their doctor or seek a second
That's what I
opinion.
recommended.
But
Yep.
don't make a medical decision without your doctor
Right.
or without a doctor, because there's so many factors that can come into play, and everybody's body metabolizes
Yeah.
medication differently. Just over 5 years ago, I went into the emergency room with acute pancreatitis. Not a pleasant experience,
No, I
and I was
bet.
in such great pain, and I was starting to be out of it a little bit, and they gave me the emergency room cocktail to calm people down, which is Haldol and
Oh,
Ativan.
geez.
I didn't calm down. I got worse and more agitated. So what I had seen working in an emergency room work to bring people down actually made me worse.
Yeah.
And it's just because my body metabolized it differently. So we have to get a look at it, because diet may
Oh,
play a
yeah.
factor. What what frightens me is people will go to one of those services where they'll do their get their heritage, and it'll tell them what they're predisposed for medically, and they use that as a diagnosis or a way to live their life, instead of, it's just information that hasn't been verified by your
I had
physician.
a guest on, yeah, last week that said diagnosis is for insurance companies.
Hmm.
And I've never heard that phrase before. And I thought to myself, well, I can see that. You say attention deficit disorder. Okay, boom, here's a pill. It's like without that attention deficit disorder label, then you're not going to give that pill. So you reverse engineer it, and it's like every prescription comes from some type of diagnosis. And so the question is the diagnosis effective? Is it accurate? Is it the only way, like you said? Are there just natural plant-based remedies? Are there things like meditation or exercise, or even I don't know. I just like I'm trying. I know personally, I don't take anything. I take some supplements. That's it. But I've just been very paranoid now after my experience with my son about taking anything. And even if the doctor said, "Well, I think your youngest son needs to take Adderall because he has attention deficit," I would at this point I would step in and say, "Well, first of all, attention deficit to me is not a disorder, and I'll just get a second opinion."
And I think there are multiple pathways towards recovery, or multiple pathways to healing, regardless of what the malady may be. And certainly, we're seeing a lot of research and things on naturopathic
Hmm.
medication. I have a colleague here in Connecticut. Her name is Dr. Jaquel Patterson. She's a naturopath who's spoken around the country, and she's posting on Instagram every day. These are the things that help with
Hmm.
this. Certain plants are high in this, which helps with
What's
restlessness
her name
or
again?
helps with sleep. Dr. Jaquel Patterson.
Okay.
I will be glad to introduce you
I'd
to her.
love to meet her because I'm just like, wow, I'd really like to see what she's posting for sure.
Right. and she'll put, this food is rich in this, and this is known to help with sleep,
Hmm.
and talks about medication and self-care in so many ways. And I think that whether you go completely holistically or you use some combination is up to the individual, whether you're using some medication or you're changing your diet or doing things. So many people get better from physical health maladies by changing their diet and losing weight. You see people blood pressure go down, their
Yeah. I
thyroid may
lost
do
40
this.
pounds when I quit drinking.
So I think that exploring every opportunity and seeking health, we tell people to stop doing something, but we don't focus on where they could be. Hey,
Hmm.
look at how healthy you could be. Look what you're going
Yeah.
towards.
I'm working on putting my speech together for the tour. And one of the things I like to talk about is there's two ways to change human behavior. Like you just said, we can focus on fear. You're going to go to prison, you're going to lose your job, you're going to be an addict, you're going to be an alcoholic, or we can focus on inspiration. Like you said, these are the good things. You can live to be 100. You could, you can, be able to walk up the stairs when you're 75 years old, run an elliptical for half an hour. So I think for me, uh, I really want to focus on the positive things. That's why a thing I like to do with high schools with kids, we first talked about the word addiction. And what I like to do, Jeffrey, is I write on the board addiction. And then I say, okay, and the last time I did this was with freshmen in high school. I said, I want you to tell me what comes to mind when I say addiction. And they're just shooting off everything. And I'm writing all this stuff
Mhm.
down. And I said, I said, what do you see that's common about all these words that you put up there to define addiction? And they all kind of like didn't really have an answer. I said, they're all negative. I said, could telling the truth be an addiction? Could exercise, could eating healthy, could reading, could writing, I mean, is it possible that there's good addictions? Because in a way, we're all an addict. I mean, all of us are, but the kids just assumed the word addiction was negative. And so I'm just trying to get them to kind of reframe and rewire how they're just looking at words like sober. I mean, I don't use the word sober personally because that implies a battle. It implies I'm in a fight with something, good versus evil. I just say I don't drink. I mean, it's just to me,
Mhm.
it's I'm a fairly pragmatic person. It's like I don't know why we have to complicate it so many of these things by playing these narratives that we're supposed to play. Like you have to use the word sober if you don't drink. No, you don't. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Now, I'm not an alcoholic right now. And
Mhm.
the story I use in my book is that if I was 100 pounds overweight and I was going to an overweight anonymous meeting, and I'm sitting there and I get up and go, "Hi, I'm Jeff. I'm fat." And they go, "Hey, Jeff, how you doing?" And so I sit down, and then 4 months later, I come back and I've lost all the weight. Well, I don't stand up and say, "Hi, I'm Jeff. I'm fat." When I lost the weight, now I lost the weight. I'm not fat anymore. Well,
Yep.
I kind of look at my alcoholism the same way. I'm not an alcoholic and I don't call myself sober. And again, am I the only person that thinks this way? You know?
No, I think that a lot of people do, and there are many in the field who are starting to understand that people use the language that works best for them.
Amen.
If somebody says I'm an alcoholic and I've been in recovery for X number of years,
Yep,
fine.
I agree.
And if somebody says I'm recovered, we don't hear when it comes to something like smoking. Somebody doesn't say, you know, I I'm a nicotine addict, but I haven't smoked in 20 years. They just say I'm a non-smoker or I'm an
Right.
ex-smoker. And let people choose their own
Mm-hmm.
language rather than trying to fit them into a script. Because when you have a script, you're playing a role.
Mm-hmm.
When you use your own language that you're comfortable with, um, you're really living it's your life. It's about your life. And we have the right to identify ourselves in any way that we wish.
I mean, that's a good point. I mean, that's where my 5 year naive relationship with this gets me in trouble sometimes because I'm
Yeah.
fairly opinionated to what works for me, and I have to understand that you know not everybody thinks that way or can think that way. And I was having a conversation with a gentleman. I was going to ask you about this, and I'm so afraid to even say this because it's cancel culture we live in today. But it's my show, and
You can say what you
you are
want.
breaking the status quo. So here we go. But I had someone, we were talking about stigmas, and they're like, you know, addict and substance abuse and addiction and all that. And he goes, well, how about think about this for a minute? He said, all the billions and millions of dollars that goes into cancer research, let's say, or for cancer. there are some cancers that are self-induced. If I don't wear sunscreen and I'm out in the sun for a long time, and I get skin cancer, all of a sudden I tell everybody I have cancer, and money starts plowing into my nonprofit because I have cancer. Well, if I wore sunscreen, I wouldn't have got the cancer. Or let's say diabetes, for example. I mean, a lot of diabetes is because of what people eat. Because you can be heading to diabetes, and they can tell you to cut your diet down. All of a sudden, you don't get it. So
Mm,
there are ways you can mitigate how that happens to you. But when someone gets cancer, it's like all of a sudden everybody is like, well, I'm sorry you have it, and we want to help you. But somebody's addicted to heroin or something. It's just all of a sudden they're a scourge, and they deserve to have these problems. And it's like I struggle with that, and I'm probably not presenting it or articulating it correctly. But do you know where I'm going with that? It's
I think you're abundantly clear, and I agree 100%. First, let me say around the choice of words like an addict and things like that. As a professional, it's not my job to use those when working with
mm-hmm.
somebody. They're dependent on a substance. That's much more appropriate to say. People can say, call themselves junkies or whatever they want, but as a professional, I have to watch the language that I use when
So what's
interacting
the
with
correct
someone.
way for me to
But
say that? Because I want to try. I want to try.
somebody with a substance, somebody with an opioid use
Okay.
disorder
Okay.
is it's less threatening, and I can call myself whatever I want
Right.
if that's me, but I think as a professional we have to change the narrative for the
Yep.
field. But what you're talking about are what happens with chronic disorders. Every single chronic disorder known to human has some sort of behavioral
Mm.
component. If I have asthma and I am active and doing something and not managing it, if there's a lot of pollen in the air or it's humid and I'm overdoing it, I'm going to struggle to breathe. If I have diabetes and I don't watch my
Mm-hmm.
diet, I'm going to have problems with that. Um, Cancers are one. We see that. So there's a behavioral component for almost every chronic disorder. We see commercials for individuals with COPD that say, if you have COPD and you smoke, dot, dot, dot. So they're saying, if you do this behavior that's terrible for
Right.
COPD, we got a med for you. But there's a behavioral component. It just is so incredibly stigmatized, and a lot of the negative behaviors with substance use disorders really are the things that tear families apart. But to say that they're unique
Hmm.
is not fair.
Yeah. I just because I don't know. I'm really trying to learn the different lenses that people view these things from, and I really think that in what I'm trying to do and help people, I sometimes stumble and say the wrong thing. And initially, I came into this so overly aggressive, Jeffrey, with disease versus choice, and I finally started to realize that it's nature and nurture, it's disease and
Hmm.
choice, and we're trying to say it's one or the other, and I think that's a setup question that is just unfair. And I think in most situations, even if it is a disease, there are choices along the way. I had a friend of mine tell me one time, if you take an alcoholic that is convinced it's a disease, and they're at the grocery store, okay, by the time they get home and have that beer they took out of the fridge, they made 1,000 choices along the way that they could have they didn't have to buy the beer, they didn't have to put it in the car, they
Hmm.
didn't have to put it in the fridge, they didn't have to crack the bottle. So it's like, so it's a combination of both. I mean, if it's a disease, no one still held a gun to your head, and made you drink that. And that's where I struggle with trying to be sensitive. But I've lost two people, man. So for me to sit around worrying about hurting other people's feelings, kind of like with you, I'm trying to challenge the status quo and to change the narrative. Like I said, if what we were doing was working, I wouldn't be doing the tour. And if
Yeah.
we just, there's 35 million people or something, or it's like 15,000 rehab facilities, and it's a $50 billion industry, whatever the numbers are. Let's just build another rehab facility, right? No, I just don't. To me, that doesn't interest me. I'm not.
You know,
Go ahead.
let's build on something that's not working. We've
Exactly.
not had good outcomes
Right.
in this field. Um, over 45 years, we haven't had a change in outcomes. And one of my colleagues says, look at what was done to the telephone in 45
Yeah.
years. When we were kids, we were sneaking around the corner with the phone so mom
Right.
couldn't hear who we were
Kids,
talking
my
to.
sons can't
And
even
then
picture
nowadays,
that. They can't even picture that.
you hoped you had a
Yeah.
long
Trying
cord.
to talk to
And
some
then the
girl or
total,
something, and my mom and dad are sitting out in
eh,
the living room, you know?
the world changed with total phone. And they're like, what? Total phone?
Right.
And so I think the field needs to look at itself and say, yeah, we're not doing what we need to. We need to change, but there's such an investment in the status quo in that because change is scary. And, you know, anything that I've learned in this field is because somebody else taught me or I screwed something up and someone said, hey, don't do that. I remember working in juvenile treatment, my first job out of college. I did something, my boss pulled me aside and he says to me, hey, you F that up. Don't do it again. And then that was the end of it.
Yeah.
And we're still friends to this day, but it was, hey, you made a mistake, correct it, and we're not going to harp on it and beat on you about this mistake
But that's
forever.
easier said than done because the concept of the sunk cost fallacy is, you've got so much like AA, for example. I have a lot of people that just believe in their own space that it's an accurate statement that it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. It's saved their life. But like other people saying, man, it's outdated. It's just, it's like going to church or something. I don't really. My wife didn't like AA because of the God angle to it, and
Hmm.
again, I think a lot of people that's their turnoff. But I've been to AA meetings and they've kind of switched gears. They've updated it to a higher power, whatever your personal higher power is. But again, I've talked to some people. They're like, yeah, AA is just kind of outdated. They haven't done a really good job updating. So, but that concept of the sunk cost fallacy is so true. You put in time to something, it's hard to let go. It's hard to change, even in the face of evidence that says this is the way we have to do it. But I've done it for so many years like this. I've got a vested interest to not change. And I think that's where
Well,
we stand right now with even the war on drugs. It's so outdated.
oh yeah. I think with AA, it's well, AA was never designed as treatment. It,
Good point.
it was bastardized and brought into treatment. So if I'm somebody in the community who wants to find recovery through a 12-step fellowship, I think that's
I do
fantastic
too.
that they're out there and they do great things. But we have to not reject people because they reject our
Hmm.
choices. Oh, you should go to AA. Well, I don't like it. Well, because you haven't tried it enough. Instead of saying, hey, well, what do you want to try?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, people that want to get back involved in their faith community may go and not like this church and say, the personality is really
Right.
not for me. But it doesn't mean they're rejecting. They're going to go look somewhere else. And I think we just get caught up in saying, well, it works for me, so it must work for everybody. And I guess we call that something called the uh, fallacy of attribution.
Hmm.
We think that our attributes
Right.
apply to
Right.
everybody.
And we're all
Um,
guilty of that. We're
yeah,
all
and
guilty of that.
and I think it's SAMHSA has said I think 74% of treatment programs are 12-step based, but we haven't had a change in outcomes in 45 years. So that's problematic. Just in America alone, we've got 21 million individuals who identify as being in recovery. That's a pretty significant amount of
Hmm.
people. 21 million people identify as being in recovery or recovered.
Hmm.
Worldwide, there's a membership in the 12-step fellowships AA and NA of 5 million people.
Wow.
That's worldwide. So why are we pushing something that most people pushing something in treatment that most people find recovery another way
Hmm.
instead of letting people choose the way that they want to go? And I don't have anything against the fellowships. I think they are fantastic in the community. But when you're paying for treatment, you're paying for professional help.
Hmm.
And that's not what the fellowships were designed for. And they never asked for treatment to be boot camps for the fellowships.
Yeah, man, it's there's to me it's the wild wild west right now for the mental health.
It
It is.
is.
It's just and that's where one of my motivations and again, I'm so new to this. You have so much more experience and wisdom than I do, but is trying to connect people. I think Johan Hari again said the opposite of addiction is connection, but I think the opposite of this wild wild west in the mental health space is connection. I think you and I and the tour and all the people we're going to be connecting with, if we can somehow take all these silo shops around the country, get us all connected. And maybe there's somebody in Idaho doing something just earth shattering, really changing. I ran into somebody, Jeffrey, that blew my mind how optimistic they were on this one thing that's going to change the mental health space. And I'm like, wow, what is that? I'm okay. A million of things going through my mind. You know what it is? It's
Hmm.
virtual reality mental health. Put it on here. You click something, and and she said, I put this thing on for 30 minutes, and you wouldn't believe, all it's pretty much meditation, but it's visual. But again, it's
Hmm.
like, okay, so there's a groundbreaking thing out there. I've never heard of that. And I don't know, from a person who does certifications, and something like that probably isn't even certifiable. I mean, that's probably like woo woo magic right now on the outliers of mental health research.
Yeah, not really sure much about it, so I speaking on it
Right.
would be really be an uneducated words on my part. Yeah, if it works for
For you.
people, it works for people.
Yeah.
That's fine. I'm all for it.
Hmm.
The same with psychedelics. I'm on the fence, but if it's working for people, I certainly wouldn't want them to stop. One of the issues that we face when we look at substance use disorders and mental health is that we are siloed. And in the field that I work in substance use disorders, there's almost a badge of honor to say,
Oh,
hey, I'm in recovery.
absolutely.
But if I step forward and say, my recovery is mental health and here's what I struggle with, stigma associates that, and discrimination follows stigma, that it's not as much a badge of honor to say that. And I
Well, but
don't
hold on a second. When
think
I
that,
first met you, you made it very clear some of the issues you were having. And I looked at that.
mhm,
I got instant respect from you instantly. There was no, I talked about my suicidal ideation over Christmas publicly. This is like Mr. Undeterred. I thought about this 5 months ago. I
yeah,
think we are getting better. I mean, the fact you just opened up on my podcast with your depression, things like that, I moved you up in my respect level. I really did, because I know you're honest with me now, because everybody has these things, you know, at some level,
it's part of me. It's part of me. It's part of you, as
but
we've
it doesn't
discussed
define
before.
you
But
negatively.
it doesn't define
Right.
me. No, it's just something that I have to overcome. And in the way I deal with my issues doesn't have to be the same as
Hmm.
somebody else is dealing with theirs. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't recommend something that works for me. It's not illegal, it's not drugs, but I am motivated. I listen to music that talks a lot about self-loathing.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden people get depressed by that and I say, "Wait a minute. That's my tribe right there. There's somebody like me. I'm okay. I belong to a
I
community," and
like
people are
that.
like, I don't get it. But I wouldn't say to somebody struggling with depression or suicidal ideation themselves, "Hey, why don't you do this?"
Yeah.
Because I think it's malpractice and dangerous. It's just my thing.
Yeah. I mean, we could go off on the suicidal ideation thing, because, man, I mean, my two people I lost in my life were drugs and alcohol, obviously mental health challenges. But
Mhm.
the suicidal ideation thing is, I think, four college athletes just this year, Division 1, that have taken their own lives. And they were all
Yeah.
female, though, all four of them that I know publicly that have been in the news. So years past, I don't remember one, you know, and
And a couple of
that's
years ago, a
alarming.
quarterback from Washington State took his own life, and that was really a horrible thing. And it brought up a lot of attention to that. But when we see individuals like Simone
Yeah.
Biles saying, "I'm just not
Yep.
I got these issues." To me,
But she got
that's
stigmatized so
courage.
quickly on sports
Oh,
talk radio. Where's her courage? She's letting down America. And then after everything settled, I think everyone's like, "Wow, we really effed up. We missed a great opportunity." And everyone circled the troops and everyone supported her. But initially, it was embarrassing to watch people throw her under the bus. Absolutely. You and I are in this space now, but it was him. I was just like, "Are you kidding me? We're going back to the
it
Stone Ages here. This is ridiculous." She's had come out. She's looking for help, and we're throwing her under a bus because some stupid Olympics.
yeah, that has nothing to do with us. It doesn't affect our lives
Man,
whatsoever. And criticize, and we're seeing it now with a basketball player in New Jersey, Ben. Ben
Yeah,
Simmons was traded from the Sixers
yep,
to the Nets, and he wasn't mentally ready to
right,
play, and they're calling him soft
yeah.
and saying all these things. And I don't get it. Look, I grew up in the era of Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, who would stab you to
Bill
win a game
Laimbeer.
that
How about
doesn't
Bill
count,
Laimbeer?
right?
Yeah,
Yeah, to win a game that doesn't count.
right,
It's just a different era, and nobody knows what demons Ben Simmons is dealing with.
right,
Let the guy be. And you've got sports talk people, many of them have never done anything.
right.
Um, uh, the, but but I see others too. A colleague, Murphy Jensen, who won the French Open with his brother in doubles in '93, talks about his substance use disorder, talks about feeling
Hmm.
not good enough and things. And to me, that's brave.
Yeah,
Tony
absolutely.
Mandarich, who was number
Yep.
two
Remember
pick
him.
overall, will talk about his substance use
Hmm.
disorder and the other things going on. And to me, it's setting the tone, saying these things are out there. Even I, who sits on this pedestal for many people, can get that. Now, neither one of those two individuals, Murphy or Tony, are especially egocentric.
Right.
They're really nice guys from talking to them, um, uh, and well, you know, even keeled about
Right.
things. But people look at them and say, "Hey, they're sports stars," but they're people, and we can't lose the humanity in that. And we have to stop looking at our selfish needs.
Yeah, I mean, boy, that's so accurate. I'm just thinking to myself, just in our own family with my son Ian, who's a golfer at the University of South Dakota, and so he's a Division One athlete. And his brother died when he was 15 on the day of districts. So golf is like half the book I wrote is how golf saved my life. And uh,
Yeah.
writer captain uh, writer captain Zach Johnson did a 9-minute documentary on my son Ian because Zach's from our hometown and Ian got to play with him about losing a son and raising $40,000 in high school and how we've kind of embraced that opportunity. So, but I still think about my son over Christmas, Thanksgiving. My mom died, so, Ian lost his own mom in June, and then he lost his grandmother in November. Okay. And
Hmm.
and the University of South Dakota had systems in place to help him. And I think that's phenomenal because I know friends at other colleges. I know one friend of mine that actually quit college golf, and he said the coach and the program there had no systems in place for mental health with these kids. And now South Dakota stepped
Hmm.
up. I think they have like mental health days where you can take a day off for mental health. That is awesome, and that's what we need to see instead of pushing these kids to the brink and having them take their own lives over a sport of all things. It's like a kid. It's like my youngest son came out as gay, and it's like homosexual kids are 5 times more likely to take their own lives over something like sex. It's like it's so ridiculous that our society can't just love people for who they are and not put them up on these sports pedestals or criticize them because they're gay. I just like we have to be better. We have to do better as a society, Jeffrey.
Yeah, what difference does it make to
Right.
anybody if an individual is gay or transgendered
Apparently it does.
or
Yeah.
or have a disability?
Right.
It doesn't affect my life in any way. And why do we care? If that individual has love around them and their family and friends, who cares what? Yeah, and look, I'm not saying people should agree
Right.
or disagree or whatever. It's just let people be. Let them live their lives the way they see fit. If it's not, it's not treading on somebody's
Well, if
rights
they want your
to be
if they
gay or to be
if
transgendered
they
or.
want your opinion, they'll ask, "Hey, I want your opinion. What do you think about me being gay?" It's like,
Mhm.
I don't know. I think part of this whole tour, I'm really excited. We have one stop that's geared towards the LGBTQ community, and I'm so excited to go up there because mental health in that arena is
Mhm.
5 times more um, worse off than it is in the
Yeah,
in non communities like that.
and substance use as well in
Yeah,
those. It's an
it is.
underserved
That's the word I'm looking
community.
for. Underserved.
It's
Yep.
it's absolutely
Yeah.
underserved, because it's hard to ask for help and be who you are because there's judgment in just who you are,
Hmm.
let alone whatever disorder you may be dealing with.
Yeah. Listen, this has been great. I looked up and it's been an hour, man. It feels like 10 minutes. You're an easy guy to talk to, and I'm really looking forward to meeting you on the tour. And really excited to see your part of the country and meet people in your area that have been affected by this, and we can share stories and we can be vulnerable and we can start trying to find solutions to get these numbers to go in the right direction, and to find ways to make people's quality of life, their well-being better. And that's really, I'm not like you. I'm not trying to eradicate addiction and substance abuse. I'm just trying to make people's lives better.
Yeah, I have to look at what my locus of control is, and I
Right.
can only really control myself, but I have to, for my own well-being, um, there's some joy in seeing others happy and just living their lives. And I've learned that as I get older, as my son gets older, he's 27. When I see families with young children and those kids are laughing, there's nothing better
I
than that.
know. I
And I think
know.
that we deserve that as life in our throughout our lives.
Yeah, and that's a good point because when I now, it's like I said, it's been this October will be 6 years since we lost Seth, and I still cry. I've cried at least 4 or 5 times today,
Hmm.
and it's only 5:30 Iowa time. I'll cry a couple more times tonight, but it's a different type of cry, man. It's like it's like I'm so fortunate to have him for the period I did in my life, and it's like I miss the memories that we could be building together, but it's not the painful cry. It's just a different type of evolution that
Hmm.
I've gone through, and I'm trying to show people that you don't have to hang on to grief in a certain emotive state. I still grieve, but it's a different type of grief. It's I don't know. I can't articulate it well, except it's evolution. It's just I'm adapting. You know, I my my that pain, the intense pain, isn't there. I miss them. There's a gaping
Hmm.
hole in my heart. My wife too. I miss her immensely. I'm
Hmm.
56 and it's just me in this house. I got 2 dogs. My youngest is moving out. I'm going to be widowed, empty nester at 56. And I wasn't planning on that, man. At 50, I wanted to have a wife to come home and share dinner and go on a romantic date and travel the world. And
Hmm.
it didn't turn out that way. But I have found ways, and this is what the tour is about, Jeffrey, is become better, not bitter. It's that choice
Hmm.
I have.
I like
Viktor
that. Yeah.
Frankl, I love him to death, man. That book was Man's Search for Meaning is like the best book I've ever read in my life. And he said, suffering is my opportunity. And I think there's something in that we can look at death, we can look at grief, we can look at trauma as opportunities and not as pain and punishment and all that. So, you know,
And the Buddha has said that enlightenment comes through suffering.
it has to.
It's a part of
If it
life.
doesn't, then what's the alternative?
Yeah. I think that for me, the last thing I can say is, people don't change because we hear the thunder rumbling. We change when we get struck by lightning.
I like that. I like that.
I wish I could say I made that up, but I think I
I'll
stole it
give you
from a bumper
credit.
sticker.
It
It was a
sounds
bumper
good for
sticker or
me.
something.
Yeah.
But we have to live our lives and experience everything to become the people that we want to be.
Well, listen, it's been an honor to actually have a nice conversation with you, and it's going to get deeper and more intimate on the tour. And
Yep.
I'm just so happy you guys decided to partner with us because we want to turn a massive national spotlight on that part of the country and the people in Connecticut and
Hmm.
Bridgeport. Never been there. The history there is going to be amazing. Oh, it's not. uh,
The history is interesting. It's an interesting town.
I like interesting is an interesting choice of words.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I look forward to seeing you in July, and we'll talk before then, I'm
Yeah, and
sure.
I would look forward to being on your podcast as well. So,
Okay. All right,
all right,
great.
man. Thanks for being on the show, and we'll talk soon.